Hey everyone, Matt here from Doctors of Running, and today we're going to do a should I upgrade episode or comparison review of the PUMA ForeverRun Nitro 2 versus the original PUMA ForeverRun Nitro. Now, these are both within PUMA's stability shoe lineup, or guidance shoe lineup is the better categorization of both of them. The first one was an interesting shoe. We really had some high hopes for it, but it really didn't match that. We'll talk about some of the things that were good and not so good. And Bach and I especially really found this to be more of a neutral shoe that maybe had some slightly stable elements, but it was very clunky and just didn't deliver the way we were really hoping it to. The ForeverRun Nitro 2 is completely different. I'm going to go out there and say that this is my stability shoe of the year right now. It has been phenomenal. I've got 60 plus miles on the shoe. Everything is doing really, really well. There's some things to pay attention to, but I am very impressed with this update. It is a slightly different shoe, but it is a much better shoe and certainly a different shoe. So the purpose of this is to help you figure out, hey, what's the difference between these two, and also go with which one should you consider for you. As always, we're going to start off with specs first. So I did my men's size 10 measurements for both these. So the original one came in at 290 grams, or about 10.2 ounces in my size 10. The new one comes in a little heavier at 11 ounces, or about 310 grams, and I'll explain where that weight gain came from. Same thing, and this actually explains it. Stack heights are a little different, so both have a 10 millimeter drop. This is 36.26 for in the heel and forefoot. The ForeverRun Nitro 2 gets 2 millimeters more stack height on both areas, so it's 38 millimeters in the heel, 28 in the forefoot for also a 10 millimeter drop. But that's where the differences really start to expand. So let's start off with the ride. The ride is very different. I really wanted to like the ride of the original. The Nitro foam was nice. It had a little bit of bounce to it, but wasn't the fastest thing. It was just like really good for solid, easy miles. The problem was the heel really didn't have very much of a bevel. It was very clunky and a very stiff and uncomfortable heel. Once you got to the forefoot, it was different. It's a little bit better. There's also a really interesting comment with, not comment, but like there's a 1 millimeter lift on the medial side, which is like a wedge on the medial side. So that was a great option if you needed some mild forefoot stability, but it just had such a clunky heel that it just did not work for me and I couldn't really enjoy the shoe. The new version, version 2, really nice heel bevel, very smooth. It doesn't feel like a 10 millimeter drop shoe because it transitions so well. And the foam, despite being a heavier shoe, this foam has got a good amount of bounce to it without being unstable, and it is phenomenal for just getting into rhythm and going. I've tried to do a workout in this shoe. I did some decent pickups. It's not the fastest shoe by any means. It's not something I would use for a faster workout, but for a long run, for an easy run, or a slight up-tempo run, it does phenomenally well. I've done a fartlek, like I said, and little pickups are okay. I didn't feel like I could go as fast as nearly some other shoes that are lighter, but there's just enough there for the majority of people doing daily training miles. It is phenomenal, and it just feels like you get into a rhythm. Everything transitions really, really well. So sole-wise, massive update over on the ForeverRun Nitro 2, which a much smoother ride that honestly is the thing that I keep grabbing and putting on my feet, which is why in like a little over, actually it's been a week, the majority of my miles have been in this, and I'm already up to 60 miles. So it's been really phenomenal and really, really enjoying this shoe. The stability is also really different. So obviously I mentioned the better heel transition, forefoot transitions is even better, but the stability is now done a little bit differently. There is still the sidewalls and the heel clip that's done on the external side right here. Those travel, they didn't go as far in the original version. The new one really transitions from the heel all the way to the forefoot, and that is somewhat noticeable, not in a bad way, but it's like, oh, there's definitely a sidewall there. The major difference is you can see it on the bottom. One of the cardinal sins, in my opinion, of footwear design for a stability shoe is not filling in the midfoot. So that was not done here, and that really detracted from the ride here. This version, they filled it in. They put a little bit of extra outsole, which will also create a little bit of lateral bias there, which is great. And also the biggest thing is this foam on the inner part here. It's kind of designed similar to the Saucony Tempest, not quite, but where it's got this centralized amount of softer foam and a firmer layer of outer foam. And that just creates a centralized guide. This is why this shoe is like the definition of stable, of a guidance shoe. It's phenomenal. So this really, really keeps you, with the filled in midfoot, and it keeps you really centered throughout no matter where you land, no matter where you load, it's going to create like mild guidance centrally on both the medial and lateral side throughout the length of the the shoe. And it is noticeable. It's not like in your face. It's definitely a guided shoe, not an aggressive stability shoe. And at some point I should probably define that's it's still a stability shoe, right? It's going to make some influence on your mechanics for sure, but it does so through some centralized guidance that works really, really well. I will say when I put this on, I was like, oh, I feel a little bit of pressure in my medial arch on the inner arch, but it wasn't super aggressive. It wasn't until I started running and I'm like, oh, I haven't been in a stability shoe for a while. This is that, and I was kind of like feeling my a little bit my muscles on the outside of my ankle, and I was like, oh, these are kind of working differently, and then realized, oh. And then it just, within a mile, I was like, this is a solid shoe, and just adapt to it right away. The old version was is like way too subtle. There were some really cool things. The raised medial side and the forefoot was really, really cool. There's also a little metatarsal lift in the insole, which I'm not gonna pull out, but it just has a little bit of a raised thing, which is I don't know of any other shoe that does that, but the thing is, you can also do that by buying a little piece of foam felt, and I teach my patients to do this all the time to help lift the front of the foot up a little bit, like the metatarsals right under like the bones of the arch, of the inner part of the arch. I'll describe that better in a different video, but it just provides some support in a different way under the anterior midfoot for people that need that. People that are having trouble collapsing there, maybe having a little bit of neuroma issues. That's sometimes where that can be helpful. So that's here, but the problem is it's part of the insole, which is really soft, and it feels like a little bit of gentle pressure. So maybe like a nice little proprioceptive cue, but it never really felt like it did that much. So it was cool to see, but it just felt like this shoe was more of like a neutral, slight stable neutral shoe, but not really in that full guidance area except for the heel, but that just ended up being clunky. So version 2 really improves on that. It is very much a guidance stability shoe, really nice and centralized ride. Those people that need mild to moderate stability are actually going to do fairly well in this shoe if you want to be centered. The upper is also different. That's also where some additional weight has come from. The upper in version 2 is much thicker than in version 1. Version 1 was fairly thin. There was a nice padded tongue, which was not the same in here, but the issue I had is volume was a teeny bit low, not terrible. I couldn't get a secure fit in the heel. Literally every run I did, all 30 plus miles in this shoe, my heel was slipping out of the shoe, and I just couldn't get it locked down. And when I did, it still felt like I was getting crammed in there. This upper is so much better. It is much wider. The volume is still very low. I would go true to size with this shoe, but the volume was so low. Initially, I was like, this needs to break in. It does. I almost thought, do I need a size up? Don't get a size up. It should break in for you nicely. Unless you have a really high volume foot, this may not work. But once I did, lot of wiggle room for the toes without being super duper wide. The midfoot fits really nicely, very secure. Heel is very secure. Yes, there's a decently stiff heel counter back here, not terrible, but there's so much padding that I didn't notice it. And my heel was locked in there really nicely. The only problem I had, which this version did better, is that the tongue is super thin. So I actually got a little bit of what's called lace bite, where I'm trying to tighten the laces down, and it's kind of pinching the top of my foot. I had to get this kind of optimized and loosen it just in the right way to get a secure fit. But once I did that, totally fine. Does it still pinch a little bit? Yes, it does. So those that are really sensitive to that, be wary of that. This version has a little bit more of a padded tongue that might work a little bit better. But outside of that, ride fit is really good. Upper is breaking in really nicely. Like I said, it is lower volume, but a little bit wider in the forefoot. Gets more snug in the midfoot and rear foot. Whereas this one, it was more consistent, where it was fairly normal width fit in the forefoot and the heel, and just a little bit wider and not as locked down in the heel. So if you're a little wider heel, maybe that'll work. But honestly, version 2 is such a massive and great update. The only thing it's a slightly disappointing thing is that the shoe got heavier. I understand why it got heavier. Version 1 is still one of the few lighter stability shoes on the market for some people that wanted to pick up the pace a little bit. When I did get up on my toes, it was actually nice. It felt lighter and transitioned really, really well, but anything else, not so good in terms of the ride. So this is more of a trainer, pure trainer, than this one was kind of borderline. Almost like that lightweight trainer a little bit, getting into that 9.6 ounce range for men's size 9. But so there's a little bit of a weight increase, but honestly, totally worth it. In my opinion, I know it's only February of 2025, and maybe my opinion will change, but thus far of the year, this is a phenomenal shoe for centralized guidance. I think people that find the Tempest a little bit awkward fitting or a little bit too narrow, this is going to be a really great alternative. For people that find the Glycerin GTS just a little bit too soft or a little bit stiff from the guide rails, this is also a really, really good alternative, as the specs are very, very similar. But overall, very impressed with this shoe. I know the original is going to work really well for some people, so maybe if you just need really mild guidance, or if you want to get you're a little bit more on the forefoot or a clunky heel doesn't bother you, maybe this one's going to be better. But if you want full length guidance from the heel to the forefoot that's done really, really well, that definitely is impactful with a wider forefoot, lower volume, that just feels great for getting through tons of really awesome miles, be it long or easy runs and transitions really, really nicely. Version 2 is going to be the far better shoe. So overall, PUMA, good job on this shoe. I'm really impressed. I'm going to have a 100-mile review really soon. Outside of that, as always, I want to know, please comment below. Do you agree or disagree with this? What do you think of version 1? Have you tried version 2? Do you like it more or less? And last but not least, hope this really helps you figure out what works best for you. I'm sharing a little bit about what works best for me, but I'm also thinking about all of you out there and really hoping this content helps you figure out what works best for your unique foot.